this venue and starting up our sort of regular sequence of talks. I know that there was a competition with one individual who had a competing event tonight. I know it's a name you probably don't even recognize, Bernie Sanders. It makes it a little bit difficult sometimes to compete with that, but I'm glad that you're here and you decided to come and see this instead of go up there and see them. So essentially, we planned the Earth Summit. Can you hear me all right? Is this working out? Okay, good. We planned Earth Summit for a big one-day event, which would have many speakers, and it was going to be in that gigantic room if you get a chance to go look at it. But this is run by the city of San Diego, this facility. It's a good price for rooms. This is a nice room, I think. It's a historical kind of a place. But they were having a real hard time with the sort of setup that we wanted in that room. Basically, they called me and just basically said to me, we can't do it. And so we decided also for other reasons to say, well, let's do a series of talks. That way we can kind of get used to the logistics of doing it. And we can also have speakers give them more time to be able to finish what they're talking about. Because some of the stuff is pretty deep, some of the things that you'll see. I'm going to go pretty fast through my talk. We're going to be having, the next one is on the second Monday, which is going to be September 9th instead of the 2nd because we've got Labor Day and conflict. That's going to be the Tijuana River pollution talk. We're going to be having the EPA expert, Douglas Leiden, speak, and he's an expert. He's going to tell us what the situation is with the Tijuana River and is there any hope of cleaning it up so we don't have these big spills. And after that, in October, we're going to have a talk on 5G about the new, cellular infrastructure that they're putting in and is it worth the risk. Citizens Oversight, founded in 2006, incorporated in 2011, with the mission of encouraging people to be effective by civic engagement and major projects now, election integrity. I'm not talking about that at all tonight, but San Onofre has been a really big project for about the last 6 years especially. And now there are Summit series. I'm a trained engineer. I've got a master's degree in electronics engineering from San Diego State University. Ran for Congress once and for the Assembly one time. Obviously I failed, but I'm kind of happy I didn't get into the cesspool too hard. I'm really not cut out for it, I have to admit. But the idea of citizens oversight, we're going to focus on nonpartisan issues. And because I found that people from all parties don't really disagree if they find out the facts about a certain local issue. Not at all. Now we're going to get started with San Onofre, and I'm going to be going pretty fast through these because I have a lot of slides, so please try to keep up. Yes, ma'am?
Could you turn the mic up just a little bit?
See if I can do that.
Oh, maybe it's closer.
Yeah.
Even better off with forward, that's the only one.
I can probably try to get closer to the mic.
Yeah, much better.
Okay, can you hear that better? All right, so, and I'll speak up. So this is a picture of San Onofre. In fact, let me take this out so I can move around. So San Onofre from the top, and this is an old picture because that Unit 1 reactor right there is no longer there, and it hasn't been for quite a few decades. They're numbered 1, 2, 3. This is the one that had the emergency shutdown. And you can see the spent fuel pools here. That's where the nuclear waste is right now. It is not under the big domes. It's in a separated building, which is not really that thick in terms of, that secure in terms of being the building itself. As you see, this is a railroad right here. That's the number 2 railroad in the nation, believe it or not. This railroad is very heavily used. Freight and passengers. And of course, I-5, which is one of the few north-south routes here. You have to go all the way to the 15 to get on one. And then the beach, this is called the Pacific Ocean, something that we're really fond of. How do these work? Well, this is a pressurized water reactor. It uses regular water, but it's under pressure. So in the reactor here, it is very high pressure and super hot, about 650 degrees Fahrenheit. And then it goes through these tubes, back down, and then back through this primary loop. So this is all radioactive water going through these tubes. There's 10,000 tubes in that bundle. This thing right here is about 60 feet tall and 16 feet around. Now there's actually two of these, two steam generators on each reactor vessel. But before we go to that, I should say that once it goes through the steam generator, it generates steam. The steam goes over here, turns the turbine, generating electricity, and then it is recondensed back into water again. This side of it is supposed to be non-radioactive, but it's still a closed loop. The seawater out here comes through and it gets circulated back out to the ocean, which is no longer legal in California to have this once-in, single-pass system where it takes seawater, filters all the life out, and then spits it back out. Just kills everything off. So that's illegal, but they grandfathered it in. So they have two steam generators. These are the biggest steam generators in the world. None are bigger than these. So here's a person. You can see the scale. Now, they had a project to replace these. Back in 2005, they started it, and they did a project with Mitsubishi Heavy Industries to replace the steam generators. They subcontracted with Mitsubishi, as I said, instead of going to France, which was a place that they kind of logically should have gone. But at that time, it was 2005, remember, we weren't even having French fries at the time. It was called Freedom Fries. So we have some politics playing a role there. This is the old one, and you can see the tubes come up. They make a almost right angle degree, you know, it's curved, but it's very sharp, straight across, curved, and then back down. Each one of these tubes that looks pretty small in the figure there is 3/4 of an inch, about the size of my thumb. So they're still pretty small, and there's you can see how many there's 10,000. And there's gaps between each one of these. Look what they did in the new one. They made it a smooth arc instead, which sounds, oh, that's beautiful. It's a nice smooth arc. That's because that's what Mitsubishi was used to doing. It turns out that became a problem because these anti-vibration bars, see, this whole thing is kind of like loosely coupled. It's not welded into place. And what it does is it gets hot, everything expands. It's like a bunch of wet spaghetti in there, and it's boiling the water. They need to keep these from hitting each other. And that was the problem. So what they did was the main thing that they did was in the change, they wanted to change to this new alloy of steel. 690 instead of 600 because the alloy 690 cracks less. And so throughout the industry they knew that they had this big problem with cracking. They said, let's go over to alloy 600, 690. But these have a lower or a higher thermal resistance. It doesn't pass the heat as well. And so they made all these other changes. They changed the flow rate. They added more tubes. They changed the egg crate design. And probably the biggest thing was that they just changed the overall design of that smooth design, because that ended up wiggling around. And I'll show you what the big problem in their modeling, because they had a computer modeling problem. The old one had a square grid, as you see here, like tubes are centered on a grid. And in the new one, they did is triangular grid. They're still 1 inch apart, center to center, with a 1/4 inch in between. But their software was designed to deal with this orientation. And what they said was, well, we can't figure out how to do this, so we're just going to measure from every other row instead of to every row. And so then they said, oh, the flow is really good. When in actuality, you can see the flow is really difficult. It has to wiggle its way through, and not this. Huge, huge problem. Now, they had a big lawsuit. They had a 11,000-page court case that I read through. And there was one point in time when the consultant said, gee, this flow rate seems awfully high. It's too good. Something's wrong here. So let's go over and see how it compares with, we'll use the same model and compare it with existing plants and see how it compares. I don't want to go any further with this right now. And he says, no, we're going to push it forward. We are out of time. We need to get this done. So we're going to just go with the design with really good manufacturing. We'll keep the tolerances really tight and we'll be okay. Well, they weren't okay. The thing did shake itself apart within 11 months for number 3, and number 2 was in disastrous shape as well. It was normally none of the tubes are plugged after the first run of 2 years, 18 months. You don't have to plug the tubes. The reason they plug the tubes is for some reason they get pitted or they get thinned or there's some problem with the tube. As soon as they get a little bit of pitting or there might be a danger of it leaking, then they have to plug it. They don't use that tube anymore. And I guess I didn't show it in here. The difference in pressure between inside and outside, this inside is around 2,400 pounds per square inch. Really high pressure. That's to keep the water from boiling at 650 degrees Fahrenheit. And on outside, it was 1,400 pounds, which is still a pretty high pressure, but there's 1,000 pounds of differential there. A little pinhole started, and it was doubling it was basically going up 40% an hour. Basically, it was on a rapid increase. And they were getting a bathtub full of water, basically, per day. And they were seeing this happen within a few hours of this thing. And I can imagine they were probably extremely loud when they put them in. They had to know that something was wrong. But a disaster for them because they just had spent around nearly $800 million to replace them. Including taking all the old ones out and so forth. They really weren't designed for this replacement. So they had the emergency. That was January 31st, 2012. Almost to exactly 1 year after Fukushima. Everybody was, after Fukushima knew that there was big problems with these nuclear plants. So we then had, you can see Gary Hedrick, he was a big player. We had some people from Japan there. Gene Stone was a person there. Carol Jankow, here's Donna Gilmore. This guy back here is Gunderson. He was a good whistleblower from that. There I am. Here's our rallies that we had. We had a bunch of 2 rallies by the plant to raise the issue up to the community and make sure the people on the freeway knew that we were concerned about this shutdown. And they did not go forward with it. But here's a big lesson that we're learning here. This was not due to a earthquake, a tsunami, a terrorist attack. None of that happened. Nothing happened at all. It was as calm as can be. This was a design error, engineering design error. That's it. And management error. They could have found this. They were in the middle of allowing that consultant to go ahead and check it, and they said, no, we're going to go ahead with the design as it is. So humans cannot design perfectly. Guess what? I'm an engineer. I know designs are bad all the time. Look at the engineering disasters on the History Channel. So even with the best intent, there's no way we can make sure that these things are going to be safe. Yet we have to have safety at these nuclear plants because the consequences are really immense. Accidents are unavoidable, therefore we must avoid nuclear power and shut down all the remaining plants. That's my point of view. Now, actually, we're in a good position to do that, and this is probably the most important graph of your life. PV solar is dropping like mad. Wow. Oil, nuclear, coal are all becoming more expensive. Why? Because they're running out. Nuclear is more expensive because it's so dangerous. And it's also running out. wind is going down and solar is just dropping like crazy here. It's making everything else, it's competing so hard with everything else. Nothing else can compete with it. So we're going to be in a future of PV solar, that is photovoltaic, directly taking electricity out of the panels, and wind in the future. We can, by 2050, we can be away from all oil, gas, and nuclear, and have all of our power from those other sources. They've proven that to be true. You want to ask a question?
Do you have involved with batteries?
Battery?
Yeah, put on there.
Oh, yeah, batteries would be good, but they're actually not a source of power, they're just storage. There's other sources of storage that you can use, but these are the actual sources. The other thing, and I was showing Tom English this the other day, is that these are the nuclear plants here. This is all the nuclear plants lined up, and all the ones below this line are not economically viable. They do not compete in the marketplace. They lose money all the time, unless they get subsidies or something else coming in. So they are economic losers, which is a good thing for the anti-nuclear community, because now we can realize that we can do something correctly with the waste and not use that to try to block up them not building any more plants, which is one of the agenda items. We also had these severe disasters. You probably didn't hear of this first one here, which was in 1957. They actually had to evacuate Santa Susana's right up the coast near Chatsworth up in LA. And they had a pretty bad disaster, a meltdown there. 3 Mile Island, you should have heard about. How many people have seen the HBO Chernobyl movie? Okay, that is everybody else, that's your assignment. Get the free trial version of HBO if you're not a member. They give you 7 days. You can watch it in a couple of days. You've seen it too?
There's also a podcast that's really good that describes.
Oh yeah, but the movie is actually done very, very well. And you will be a believer after you see this movie about how bad nuclear is. It was just a complete disaster. And of course, we didn't hear very much about that because it was in Russia. They were trying to keep the information down. They also say not too many deaths from these things. And why? Because they say due to the accident, we didn't have very many deaths. What is the definition of accident? Just that very time period of a few hours when the thing happened, nothing afterwards. So that way, anybody that dies after the first few hours doesn't count. And so that's how they get it by with saying, oh, there's not too many people have died from nuclear power. Well, dying is not the only problem that it has. It also decimates huge areas. They've had many other smaller accidents. They try to keep these from us. So when we had this accident in January 31st, 2012, and then they finally relented and shut down the plant about a year and a half later. We had these 3 projects that started. Figuring out the shutdown costs, who's going to pay for the plant, and that was mostly done at the CPUC in these sort of courtroom-like hearings. I spent a lot of time working on that. The decommissioning is the actual dismantling of the plant and returning it to greenfielding or making sure that the site can be used for other things. And then the nuclear waste problem. So we looked out in the 2010 in this shutdown cost part of it. Because of the 2010 San Bruno gas explosion disaster that you may not have heard about because it was in San Bruno. San Bruno is a little bit south of San Francisco. And in this explosion, they had this gas line running under these homes. It burst, killed 8 people, destroyed 24 homes. And so then they had a big investigation as to why did the utilities take the money to fix the gas line, and they were told they had to fix it, and then they didn't do it. Then they overpressurized the line anyway, and then it burst. So this became a criminal thing because of these deaths. And so therefore they had gone to Michael Peavy, who is the president of the CPUC, this guy here. They went to his house and in his top desk drawer found the RSG note, this handwritten note here, which is the business points for the deal. He had kept this. This was actually concocted back in the Hotel Bristol, Warsaw, early on, March 26, 2013. Happens to be the, so remember the plant had its shutdown, it's an emergency shutdown, January 31st, 2012. So now we're a year and a couple months later. The proceedings are all in process. This guy goes off to, up here, meets with Stephen Pickett, which is against the rules. This is a judge. He's meeting with the people that are in the case. Not supposed to happen. And then he figures out the deal points, and then basically then we got the feeling, oh yeah, if the whole thing is rigged and fixed, because we saw that nothing was happening in these meetings. We didn't know about this at the time. This didn't happen until after the whole deal was voted on. we don't agree to this, we think something is up. We sued them in federal court. So they had the original deal, which was $3.3 billion. They said, oh, we're going to be suing Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, and we're going to be getting all this money from them that we're going to then share with you ratepayers and cover things up, as long as you cover our butts now. And so that's kind of what their deal was. First, you make it us whole. We're going to go after them and get all the money. But in the contract it said, Mitsubishi says, we're not liable for anything more than what you paid us, in big, bold print. In fact, they spent about $150 million prosecuting the case, and they only got $138 million out of it. So they lost money in that case, and all this glory thing about how the ratepayers were going to share and all this extra money was all just a big act. So they had this, if you see here, maybe you can't see it, but this right here are the tiers, where we would be sharing in all these tiers, like they have them built up, like, okay, if we get, for the first 800 million, you're going to get 50%, and for the next, 2 billion, you're going to get, gives you the idea they're going to ever get some of this money. In reality, this was all just a way to make us think that we were without. We found out that San Onofre was basically non-competitive due to the gas prices due to fracking. Fracking came online, made the gas prices not go up as much as they thought they were going to go up. Fracking, a very bad thing, but it kept the gas prices down and made nuclear go out. Big news is they shut the plant down. Most important thing. So we got them down by another $775 million after these additional, 2012 had happened. The first deal was concluded in 2014. 2015, we found out about the RSG note. Then there was all these sanctions for meeting and so forth. That was that first year. Then we went through a review of it next year. And then finally, mediation 2017. Beginning of 2018, we finally struck the deal, $775 million. The only way they did this was because we had the lawsuit, and it's not shown here, but Citizens Oversight with Mike Aguirre, we were the lead plaintiff, had sued Southern California Edison and the CPUC in federal court, saying that this was not right what they did. They shouldn't have met in Warsaw, Poland, and done this deal and so forth. That was just about to go into the court and have the hearing, and that's when we finally got the deal struck. And the amount of agony going through this for about a year of mediation is, it's all confidential and so forth, but it was just sort of a joke what we had to go through. But we still have to deal with the nuclear waste. We got the settlement of who's paying for the plant. Their original deal had the ratepayers paying for the plant in another 10 years and making them money for another 10 years even though it was shut down. And we said basically, You can't have the last 4 years. That's what we got out of them. They had to relent to those other 4 years. Here's where the waste is now, in this ridiculous place right next to the ocean. We have this very deadly material that's going to last a very long time. This line here is recorded human history, so you can see it's going to last way longer than we're used to. We have 3.6 million pounds of heavy metals. That doesn't include all the canisters and stuff. That's just the uranium and the plutonium and all the other crap that winds up being after they burn this stuff. If we wind down nuclear power at this point and not extend the life of these plants that are now existing, we'll still have about 120,000 tons and the equivalent of 10,000 canisters of this crap that's going to last virtually forever. So what's in these? These are the typical fuel assemblies. I'm going to test you later and have you tell me how many of those are in there. Just kidding. So there's little eraser-sized pellets in each one of these. Hundreds. These things here, much taller than this example, they're about 13 feet long. So about the size of two of these tables put together, but not that wide. 9 inches. It's 9 inches square. And they vary a little bit. Different plants have different sizes. They keep them in these big fuel pools most of the time, super deep so that they can lift them all the way up and move them around and put them in and so forth. They also then tilt them to the side and put them through this little channel here and then go into the main containment. That's where they put them into the containment. They have to put them on the side and drag them through and then into this pool. So this is how they keep them most of the time. When they first started, they thought they were going to be able to use these pools, and then the government was just going to pick up the waste and move it over to Yucca Mountain, wherever it was going to go. They thought, okay, we don't have to worry about our waste. In 1998, January, they were supposed to come up with Yucca Mountain was going to be open. And they didn't do it. So the first thing they did was they started packing these in tighter. They had re-racking going on. So first they put it in twice as dense, and then 4 times, and then like 8 times as dense inside these pools by putting boron shields and other gimmicks through in here to collect it and make it so that it could deal with it. The water absorbs the gamma rays and the radiation coming off of these things. And otherwise, if you stood next to one of these, even if it's been out of the reactor for 10 years, in 3 minutes you get your lethal dose. This fuel pool, though, at San Onofre is at ground level and below the ground. You may know that at Fukushima they were 3 stories up. So that's why they had a big problem with those, because the earthquake, and would those fuel pools survive being 3 stories up? And they were seriously worried about them draining. If you drain the water out, then all of this fuel starts catching on fire, especially the cladding, which this cladding right here is zirconium cladding, and if it gets into the air with a certain amount of heat and it catches on fire, it's just got a huge disaster going on. So you don't want these ever to drain.
So Ray,
yeah.
You have to keep these cool for a million years or what?
These were just on a temporary basis. They were planning to just have it picked up and taken to Yucca Mountain. They didn't really know. You know, they put these in with this.
So what's happening to them now?
They're still in there. And in fact, these are being overfilled. So what they did was they said, oh my God, we're filling up. They're not picking up. What are we going to do? And so then they re-racked it to get more in it. And then they went to dry storage. So I'll cover that in just a quick second so you can see what they did next, because they had to get rid of it because they didn't know where to put it. So Yucca Mountain, you've heard a lot about this probably. This is actual picture of the mountain. It's about 90 miles north of little town, maybe you haven't heard of it, named Las Vegas. Anybody heard of that small town? Yeah. Well, you can imagine Nevada isn't too happy about having this become the waste dump for all of the country. They were supposed to have 2 or 3 geologic repositories, places that they could deposit this stuff forever. East Coast, that's where most of the reactors are. They were supposed to have a couple over there and then one over on the West Coast. And then finally they said, well, this is the only place we can put it. And if you look on Google satellite view, you'll see that this is where they did all of the atomic testing. So you'll see these big craters in the ground where they did the underground testing, and I think some of the overground testing there. So the place is a disaster. No, you can't go there. It's all radioactive. So they have, very briefly, a 5-mile tunnel that they dug through the mountain here. It isn't very deep. You can see the water table is not is above, below it, and so the water seeps through this. And the canister here, I guess I should show the other one. I don't see the picture of it. The other canister, I don't know why it's not in my presentation. Maybe we'll see it later, but it has 37 versus what you see here, which is what, 9 plus another 12, 21. So they had this, it's a double layer canister, and then they had this other shield going around it. And they want to put it down in these channels. And the big problem with it is this. It's too high. It's got fault lines running all through it. It's not, when they say deep geological repository, it isn't deep. And putting the stuff in there, even if it did work, the canisters that they have from the reactors today are far too hot to put in. They are way up inside around 400 degrees C, outside around, it'd be like an oven. Like, you can't touch them. First of all, they're radioactive, so you can't get close to them. But if you could and you touched them, they would burn you dramatically. They're very hot, like having an oven on. So if you put those down inside the mountain, this place would get hot, super hot. You wouldn't be able to go in. So they said, okay, well, we're going to have big ventilation fans and cool it for 150 years. So how much sense does that make, putting it underground and then cooling it for 150 years anyway with the air from outside? You may as well just leave it on the top. This is all just a bunch of crap. And, from an engineer's standpoint, I look at this and say, you've got to be kidding. The canisters are not the right size. They're way too small. They're not the ones we're using. They have this stupid titanium thing that goes over it. It's a mess and way too hot. The big problem here is that we have a default situation where we leave the waste at each one of these plants for the near future. And maybe that's the best solution. Maybe it is, because it has to cool on the surface anyway. They do make dandy terrorist targets. They're usually near an important body of water, except for only one plant in the world, which is the one next to Phoenix, Arizona. It doesn't have a body of water. It's out in the desert, and it burns up a bunch of effluent from the city. We have the Department of Energy. They have the responsibility for the waste, all the waste, including defense waste. Nuclear Regulatory Commission is responsible for safety, and the CPUC is for the money. So they always say, well, that's not our responsibility. Safety is the NRC's responsibility. You can't, if you're local, you say, well, I don't think it's safe. Oh, we don't have any ability to dispute this due to safety. That's the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, turf. So you go up to the governor, I don't think this is very safe. Sorry, I have no jurisdiction over safety. That's the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So they put this into the hands of this one commission. Here's where all the colors, just ignore that. This is where the waste is being stored all over the country. And they say in their waste confidence study that you can have indefinite storage. First of all, they say the original license of 40 years can be extended to 80 years. Then they have another 60 years, 100 years after that, and then indefinite is past 160 years. So they're saying every place that you have a plant is okay indefinitely. But the license term is really only 40 years for these canisters. They weren't designed for that length of time. Usually I'm expecting the picture of a canister. Maybe I left it out somehow, but we have at San Onofre these horizontal type, and they push the canisters inside these holes horizontally, and we have a vertical type. Two kinds there. And maybe the underground ones are a little bit better, but you have to build them all at once. These can be kind of incrementally added to the set. And if there's something really bad happen, you could just kind of pull this apart and get to the canister. These here that go under the ground, how do you get to it if there's a problem? No way to get out, get to it to pull it out. So as soon as they said we're going to put this again is the system that I showed you, which is right next to the water. So they said, we're going to be putting this in right next to the water. Now, if you remember, this is where the Unit 1 dome was. And one of the reasons I think they wanted to put it there so close to the water is to cover up all of the crap that was left there from the Unit 1 dome. What a smart thing that is to do for them. They says, either we're going to have to clean up this Unit 1, which is going to cost us a lot of money, or pocket the money, put the nuclear waste over on the top of it, and then never move it, because who moves a nuclear waste facility? No one does. So they're saying that's probably why they put it in this really ridiculous place. Okay, moving along then. And I expected to have that canister picture in there, but I didn't see it. So as soon as they said we're putting that in, we sued them after the Coastal Commission said we're going to approve it. The term is only 25 years, but they know it has to be at least 35. Anyway, they added special conditions. Basically, it's funny because the Coastal Commission won't allow roses in the coastal zone, but they'll allow a nuclear waste dump. So we said that kind of doesn't make a lot of sense there, folks, does it? Because the NRC has control of all nuclear safety issues, the Coastal Commission, we can't consider whether it's a good idea from a safety standpoint. Okay, we finally see the canister. You can see how many slots there are. There's 37 slots. Has a dual lid on it. But they're thin. They're here 5/8 of an inch thick. Most places in the country they're only a half of an inch of stainless steel. 6 feet in diameter, around 18 feet long, 50 tons loaded, which is a lot. Very, very hard to move around. What they didn't know when they first approved this is that they do corrode. They do stress corrosion cracking. Chloride-induced stress corrosion cracking happens when there's salt in the air. Guess where they're putting it? Right next to the ocean. So this is going to exacerbate that problem, which they said you're not going to have when they first approved it. Now, what they're doing is lowering these down into cavities with a crane like this part here actually goes up and down completely in synchronization with this canister, which has to be surrounded by the transfer shield, this cast to shield the workers, which is, the transport cask is 15 inches thick, has about 9 inches of lead, and then either concrete or water. Strange, because the lead doesn't stop the neutrons, it stops just the gamma rays. But the water or concrete will stop the neutrons. So they have to have two different kinds of material. And you don't want to get close to this anyway, because you can see the top is right there. They're lowering it down into the hole. And then in theory, they put the lid on it, and then all this concrete and soil and stuff around it is going to absorb all the gamma rays and neutrons that are coming out. But realize it's not sealed. The air comes in and goes up and cools these off, so the heated air is always coming out. They're not sealed to the environment. The distance to the environment here is only the thickness of this shell, about the width of a dime. Similar to what we had in the steam generators, those tubes that I told you about, that was really the difference between the radioactive water on the inside and the non-radioactive water on the outside, the thickness of a dime. So despite having this big giant concrete dome over there that looks so secure, in reality the difference between radioactive and non-radioactive is the thickness of a dime. Not very much. That's why they were concerned about the leak in the tubes, which were hard to make. We do not have any experience with these canisters over any kind of long period of time. No canisters have ever been removed and inspected. So they really don't have a lot of experience. They also are putting this barely above the high water mark, only 100 feet from the ocean. And whistleblowers said that they actually had to pump down the water. It was actually coming out of the ground when they dug it down. So it is not over groundwater level. It's in the groundwater level. One more thing, this thing called the Ring of Fire, earthquakes, 90% of the world's earthquakes and 81% of the largest earthquakes occur on the Ring of Fire. We're in it. And we're in the hazardous zone. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission says it's up to this 104 west longitude. Everything to the west of that line is considered special. You have to have special guards for earthquakes. Not a good place for it. And we have this newly determined that it's all one fault line. They spent years trying to determine this. I could have probably told them that, or anyone could. Take a look at this. Does that look like one fault? Well, they said not quite connecting here. But now they said, yeah, you know what? It is pretty much all one fault line. That is a 7.4 magnitude quake capable fault line. The waste facility is designed for 7.5. Ooh, lots of margin there. Not really. We have the ocean air. We know about stress corrosion cracking. As I said, the NRC judge admits that this was not known when the canisters were first approved. Sea level rise predicted, okay? And the expert that I saw the recent presentation on this said, there's no way we're stopping sea level rise. It's going to happen. Look at the new shots of Greenland and Antarctica. He said it's all going to melt. All of it. Not within our lifetime, we hope. But the oceans are going to go up at most 230 feet. But that's the limit. They're not going to go more than 230 feet. So we're kind of having, so if you live within 230 feet of the water line today, within 500 years you'll be covered up. But within to 2117, which was 100 years, the Coastal Commission, they admit it's going to be covered with water all the way around the ISFC. ISFC means Independent Spent Fuel Storage Installation, which is the word they use for that facility. Sorry, I sometimes use the acronym and don't explain what it is. So we got severe problems with the site. Terrorist risk, well, it's right on the ocean. A terrorist could just climb out in a little suit and fire a, shoulder-fired missile over that, or drive a truck up or something. Oh, so many ways. Crash a plane into it with explosives. We would have a dirty bomb that would then require that we all evacuate. It's an earthquake zone, a tsunami zone. We got residents all over, right next to the ocean. There's a freeway and railroad. We talked about sea level rise and corrosion and the erosion. It's going to be underwater. There's nothing good about the site. There's never should be put here. But then we have the problem of, we know that, but where do we put it? Where do we put it? Who are we going to give it to? Who should we give our waste to? So the options that we thought of, this Palo Verde plant, which is the one next to Phoenix, it's already a nuclear plant, it's already mostly ruined. They already have a spent fuel there. Let's add it to their spent fuel, and it's out in the desert, away from the earthquake risk, the ocean and stuff. And then they had the Consolidated Independent Storage, or CIS proposals, which put it out in New Mexico or maybe Texas and consolidate all of it so we don't have too much management expenses and move it all out there for maybe the near perpetual, permanent. They say interim, but really, let's face it, it's going to be several lifetimes before it gets moved. And then we said somewhere between here and Yucca Mountain, maybe there's a place on the railroad. Let's look into that. And then finally in Camp Pendleton, but further east, and that's what I think is going to be the best thing, but we'll go into that in a second. Surface is really our only alternative because it's too hot to put under the ground, unless you have some novel way of doing it, and there may be some ways with the deep borehole, which I guess I didn't put in here. But one good place to put it, we're looking at Southern California Edison headquarters here, and we noticed that the ISFA fits in their parking lot just fine. And then the executives can look out of their corner window and check it every day. Wouldn't that be a good place? For the next 250,000 years, they say it's perfectly safe, so let's put it at their headquarters. But really, this is Palo Verde nuclear plant, which never should be there. This is Arizona with great solar resources. But we have 3 units running, really big ones, the same size as one of the big San Onofre units. And you can see out here is where they evaporate the water. They have a big above ground storage area for their waste that looks like it's going to be there, and have a little berm here so that it's hard to get to, hard to see. That's supposed to be their security. And you can see it's San Diego, it's way out here, so maybe far enough away. You can put it on railroads, and they have these big, never really tried, but just modeled in computers to say it probably will work. But you have to have these 15.25-inch additional shells around it to keep the radiation from hitting people, and then these big absorbing things on the end in case it falls off. So they have to show that it can drop 30 meters, can hit a spike, they have certain disasters that they have to show up will get through. But of course, never really tried in reality. This is only tried in computers. You can only put 5 on a train, they're really heavy. And we looked into, because people said, okay, Lutz, you think it's not good here, where should we put it? And we thought, well, maybe we can find a place in California. So we went out to a place that we found, which is actually not even shown here. I have it in more detail in other places, but it's way the hell out there in no place. There's nothing around anywhere. But it's a Googleable place. It's called Fishel, California. If you want to Google it, it'll come up. It's a railroad stop, if you will. I don't know. There's nothing there. Maybe in the old days they had water to put in the steam engines or something. But we found that it's, even though it's right on a rail line, it's still in a fairly active seismic zone. We noticed the Amboy crater out there. So no matter where you go in California, you can have a volcano coming up at any place. There's no guarantee. So you really don't know what's going to happen. And how much history do we have with geology and seismic knowledge? Really, it was only 1964 that they finally came up with the plate tectonic theory, which now governs all knowledge about earthquakes and stuff, the plates that are shifting. That was only in 1964. So we don't have very much information, and yet they think they can predict and say, well, they say, how big have the earthquakes been at this site historically? Well, that may not be what they're going to be in the future. We don't know how big they might be. So we basically pulled this out and said, you know, the big problem with this is too remote. There's no place for people to live. There's no power. There's no internet. We'd have to make a whole city out there. You know, it can't be that remote. It has to be next to something so people can watch it. Well, they've gone out here to New Mexico, and this is Carlsbad, New Mexico. You might know where that is. Here's a small town called Hobbs, and it's halfway in between. They draw this circle of 1,000 square miles and say there's nothing in there, but there are some people that live there. There's mines and stuff, and people still don't want it. This is the WIP site, which I'm going to show you in a second, which is a waste pilot project, the waste internment pilot project, waste isolation. But this is what they're talking about when they talk about consolidating item storage. This is the big site that they're looking at. It requires an act of Congress, which is very hard to get anything through Congress right now. But maybe that's a good thing in this case. I don't know if it's a good idea. The governor doesn't want it now, the new governor. So WIP was this plant for storing defense waste, which a lot of it is liquid waste from Hanford, Washington, where they made a lot of the nuclear bombs up there and experimented with them. They brought this stuff down, and you can see they piled this is a big salt cavern, if you can make that out, and these are a whole bunch of barrels, just stacked up. And they say, well, it's not very high, what they call transuranic waste, which means plutonium and stuff, but you know, a lot of it might be gloves and gear and stuff that's radioactive and not super radioactive, not like the spent fuel is. But what they would do is they would put absorbent material into this liquid to absorb it. And it's kind of like kitty litter, the rock type kitty litter that you would use for your cats to absorb their litters. And what they ended up doing was the people that were buying the kitty litters thought, I'll do a good thing, I'll buy organic kitty litter instead of the inorganic. That sounds good. Organic, it'd be good, I'm going to buy organic. But the organic stuff expands, exploding the top off the can here, which resulted in this huge plume of radioactivity. So they had a disaster even there. Even though they said it was low-level waste and so forth and everything is fine. So the whole place became radioactive and they couldn't do it. And they're starting to use it again. But this is an example of the type of human error that can occur. In this case, buying the wrong kind of kitty litter. And also, this is just an example of, I actually plotted it out, the actual railroad line that they would take to get there. It goes through a bunch of cities here in Southern California. You can see San Clemente, Capistrano, and so forth, Laguna Niguel. All of these areas have the railroad go right through them. And they're not going to like that too much, to bring all this waste on the railroad. In fact, I think, forget it. You know, you're going to have protesters out there handcuffed to the rails, blocking the atomic trains. It's not going to be easy. Now, we had this recent canister drop disaster. They barely missed it. You know, they lowered these canisters down in the hole. There's not a whole lot of guidance going on here as it goes in, and it was hitting this little ring that they have to try, that they say, originally they call it a guide ring, and maybe it is once you get past it. But what happened was the edge of this canister got stuck on the edge of the guide ring, and then the entire rig went down, the straps were loose, and it was 18 feet above dropping. The canister could have dropped from there all the way to the bottom. And this was something, you know, they're supposed to analyze everything. Every possible accident has to be analyzed. Oh, they forgot about this disaster. Guess what? It's very hard to think of them all. and they scrape along the side and so forth, and they just restarted them on June 3rd. But the question is, how can we trust them to move all those canisters to New Mexico for 1,350 miles if they can't even move it 1,500 feet and put it into the hole? See, I'm running a little bit long here. So the lawsuit to move the waste, this happened as a result of that Coastal Commission lawsuit that I told you about. And basically, we couldn't stop them completely because we couldn't get the $200 million. You know, if you had that money, by the way, let me know, because I can put it to good use with the bond to stop them from moving the waste in there. But basically, I couldn't come up with the $200 million, sorry to say. And so all we could do is negotiate with them and got a strategic plan. They said they're going to hire these members to do it. We've had no progress as of August of them doing anything. Here is the expert team that they hired, very important people that have been involved for a long time. Allison McFarland, she's a good person. But basically, in the reports they send to me, they're supposed to say, here's what we did. And they never fill it. We will be updating you as to progress that we made in the future. Nothing is ever filled in. So now they have a new contract. And the new guy, this guy, Dr. Ernest Moniz, who's the former Secretary of Energy. So a big shot, but will he be able to do anything? More delay. Delay, delay, delay. Nothing's being done. So we came up with the HELMS proposal because the canisters are designed for short-term use. Yucca Mountain is not going to be built. Thin canisters are not good for this indefinitely, but they say that they are good indefinitely, but basically they're not. You know, so basically they're saying 40 indefinitely, and we're only licensing them for 40 years, and that's why we filed the suit against the NRC. HELMS means hardened, resistant to terrorist attacks, extended life. We want 1,000-year life of these canisters, not just 40. And even 1,000 years is only a very small fraction of the total time that they have to be isolated from the environment. Local, we don't think you should move them very far. Keep them close to wherever they are. The more moving that you do, the more danger you're asking for. And then we want monitoring, and we're saying we're going to have to leave it on the surface till it cools. That's what HELMS stands for. It's a criteria to apply to see if they're doing it. And basically, the idea that we're saying is in order to get to the 1,000 years, double wall construction. Kind of like the Exxon disaster, they went to the double hull. After that, they said, finally, we'll use a double hull. We're saying, well, let's not wait till the next disaster. Let's require a double wall now. Basically, you have the canister. We're saying put another layer around it and then pressurize in between with inert helium and then put the overpack around it. We submitted the petition, and that basically went into a black hole for now. But they're still working on it, they say. We'll see. They always do this in their meetings. They say, well, we have a way for you to get things started with our organization. You filed this petition. And so we filed it. We filed a petition and say, yeah, we want you to deal with this difference between 40 years and indefinitely. Those are not the same. Indefinitely is not 40 years. But it went into this black hole. So we're saying now that the best option to minimize risk overall is to move it 50 miles in on the coast. 50 miles, not 50, 5 miles in, which more than doubles the distance from the fault line, takes it away from the railroad, away from the I-5, away from the coast, up high enough so that even if all of Antarctica and Greenland melt, it won't be a problem. It may be there forever. And we only have 10 miles. This is road that exists, and then they have to build a little bit more. But it's within it's not public road. It's within the base. It's isolated and secure. So you're not going to have terrorists sneaking up on the trains or something else going on. And they can move it really slowly. Maybe 2 miles, barely at a snail's pace, you move it up there. You're not worried about vibration and stuff like that because you're not moving it fast enough for that. So you can move some of the waste that is, sometimes they say we can't move those yet. We can move even the high burn-up fuel or the stainless steel cladding. There's some of it has problem, and they're saying we can't move that for many years. When we move it very slowly on this short route, we can get it out of there. We can have it be HELMS compliant with a 1,000-year cast, and the only thing we have to do is get the military to allow it. So that's the end of this really fast presentation. I didn't cover everything. I could have gone on and on in depth on any of those things. I know your eyes are already glassed over from this, but now's the time. Any question that you have, I can explain. Yes?
What's involved in getting the military to approve that?
Well, you know, that's a good question because we're kind of announcing it that we're going to be pushing on this issue now as our main agenda. We want to just focus on this item. They say, because we've asked them the question, mostly about, let's go back to the so they have this spot right here, which is called the Mesa, which is part of the facility, but not within the excluded. This is the only area that's licensed for any kind of nuclear material. This is an area they were using for other things, making stuff in the facilities and offices and stuff like that. So this has already been used by Southern California Edison. Some people saying that's a pretty good place to put it. We're now saying, no, that's not high enough. That's only 100 feet over the water level. So it has to be further, and it's not far enough away in my view. It should be much further from the coast. So we've asked them about that, and they've said, oh, well, we're a training. Our mission here is training. We're just training, you know, it's not a real military base. It's just a training base. That's their point of view. If you look at the sky view, though, I don't have it here, but if you back up further, you will note that Camp Pendleton is much bigger than this, and most of the activity is much further south. Even the one they call the north area is way south of this. So this isn't an area they really don't use. And our point of view is that their mission is not just training, it's actually protecting the public. So, and that this is a, you know, the argument is that it's on your handout. Make sure you get the handout that we have, which goes in and lists those things. But basically, we do have Admiral Len Herring has come out, you know, for dealing with the waste properly, and so he's a person that has some weight within the military community, and so maybe he can be our means to get that done. So what we're going to be doing now is taking this forward. We have on the 20th of this month, if you are interested in this stuff, there is an NRC meeting coming up. Make sure you get on our no nuke dumps on the beach, you know, Facebook page, Facebook group, because that's where we're posting everything that's happening. The 20th of August is the NRC public meeting to talk about San Onofre here locally. It's not here, it's going to be up in San Juan Capistrano. That's where they do them up there. And they're never very close to the plant, of course, because they don't want to be very close. By the way, I went to, you know, we held 2 rallies there on March 13th, which was the anniversary of Fukushima, and April 26th. Both times I got an extra piece of cancer on my wrist. Had to have it taken off within 2 weeks. So, you know, we don't have events by the plan. Yes?
Can you briefly explain why you favor the thinner double wall versus the thicker 10 to 12 inches or wide single wall?
Okay, so there is a school of thought that there is a very thick single wall cask that were used in Europe. They have a bolted lid, and that's better perhaps than these thin ones. Well, maybe it is. The problem is we have the thin ones now, and I'm not, I can guarantee they're not going to want to just take it out and put it in another one just for fun. Plus, I'm not for that. The argument is that a sealed, welded sealed stainless steel canister, even though it's thin, is safer than something that you have to replace the seals and open up. Those single wall ones, the reason they're hard to work with is the seals go bad. Then you have to unbolt them, open the lid. You have to be in a contained environment. You can't just open it up to the air. You have to be in a hot cell to open that up. You have to replace the seal, put it back on, and rebolt it. Now, the HELMS approach that we've suggested, and we're not requiring that they do it this way, if they can show that those will last 1,000 years, I'm all for them. No one's shown that yet. I haven't seen any way that you can make those single wall casts last 1,000 years. That can't happen.
But you were talking about a double wall.
Double wall, the reason that works is you have the outer one that can be just as thick as those. In fact, there's new ones that are coming out that are, I believe, compatible with this thinner interior canister. Can drop the canister inside, then bolt the lid and pressurize it. Now, let's say you have to replace the seal. You can then unbolt it, replace the seal without needing a hot seal, because you're not going to open up that interior canister. You're not going to break the containment boundary. Now, over a long period of time, anytime you put anything through a piece of metal and you want it to last a very long time, that's going to weaken that piece of metal. You put a hole in it for an electronic sensor or something, or bolts or something like. Bolts don't last 1,000 years. We don't know of anything that lasts that long. So the only way to get to 1,000 years is to be able to replace the outer shell once it deteriorates. So what you do is, as explained in the HELMS proposal, you take those canisters that they have today, you put a maybe 3-inch or more outer shell around them, pressurize the area in between with inert helium, and then you can test it to see if it's leaking at any time. Just test to see if the pressure is still there. And if it doesn't hold the pressure, unbolt it or cut it off. Take the interior canister, which should be undamaged, it's never seen any oxygen, and stick it into another outer shell that then can corrode and deteriorate while still keeping that inner one okay. Now, one of the arguments they say is we need to be able to inspect what's inside. And the counter argument to that is, what for? What are you going to do if you inspect it? What do you think you're going to see? Are you going to repair it? Are you going to go in there and say, this is stuff that's deteriorating and now I'm going to repair it because it's starting to deteriorate? We know it's going to deteriorate over time just because of the radioactivity and so forth, and we're not really sure how long any of this stuff will last. So I don't really I don't buy into the you have to inspect it criteria that they're using to say that's one of the reasons we want this single shell. Open it so we can inspect it. Now, I'm not against inspecting one or two to see how it's going, but I don't think you need to make them all inspectable. Venting? Can't vent anything because anytime you put a vent in, that's going to be an area that's going to corrode and deteriorate. So now you can go in there and if you're going to inspect it, maybe drill a hole in it, put a little scope in there. Let's say it's a really high resolution scope and you can look at things. And then what? Let's say you find something. What are you going to do? Go in there and repair it? No, you're going to say it's failing. Seal it up again. So there isn't any reason to go and look at it. It's kind of like saying, well, I'm going to open up my engine in my car just to check it out, see if it's okay. No, you don't want to do that. If it's running, you leave well enough alone. As soon as you open it up, now you have to deal with all the seals, replace, maybe it's not put together right. And really, I don't want humans dealing with these things any more than necessary. Seal it up and keep it sealed, because we want it away from human hands. Okay, now, so that's the reason I don't buy into that. But let me say this. These canisters that we're using now are way too thin. The reason that they're only that thick is because the Justice Department won't let them make them any bigger, or they won't get the money for the fact that the Yucca Mountain wasn't open. So they have lawsuits against the federal government saying, you didn't open it like you said you would, and you're going to have to pay us then for all of our expenses, so please do that. And so that's the reason they can't spend more money. It comes down to cost. Next question, yes.
Are you receiving any really strong resistance to this, to moving there? And if so, what is the reasoning? Or are there just questions being asked, as far as...
And moving to Camp Pendleton Option. Actually, this is the only option that I've seen almost all of the activist groups admit it was okay with them.
Okay. But I mean, outside of that,
Outside, no, I think it's too early. We have always said, maybe in Camp Pendleton, but now we're making a very specific site and argument to say this is where we want it to go. We're trying to get people to help us push this particular idea. And if there's something wrong with the idea, let me know what it is. I'm all ears. If somebody says, well, we think that isn't quite the right place or something, or they can make a good argument for it's better to move it 1,350 miles and convince New Mexico to take it, I just can't see that ever really happening. Even though someone says, that's a great idea, let's work on it, let's spend $4 million, let's hire those experts and have them work on that idea. I just don't ever think it's going to happen. Yes, back there.
Mr. Levin is very vocal on this subject, and how does he feel about the move to Pendleton? Do you know?
That is something that actually, what happened was I scheduled this thing, I was just going to bring everybody up to date, and then I said to myself, you know what? We need to get serious about this Camp Pendleton option, and then we wrote it up and announced it along with this event. So you are actually some of the very first people that are hearing this big announcement. So here you go. You guys are the first on the planet. Well, we did put it out. It's been kind of something tossed around on Camp Pendleton, maybe the Mesa. A lot of people have said, what about the Mesa? But now we want to go in and really push on this. And you're right. I think Levin would possibly, I have, a channel of communication with them. I'm going to be, using that, maybe setting up some meetings up there. We've got the NRC meeting. We're going to be handing it out to everybody and pushing, saying to the NRC, this is a good place, and everybody that's up there, and getting the pressure put on this idea, because really Camp Pendleton, I don't think they have a very good argument against this, even though they say we don't want it, but it's already on site. It's just a bad place on site.
Right. Why can't they put it out there where they used to test the nuclear bombs up there in Nevada? Dig a big hole in the ground, like a cave or a cavern or something?
Well, that's what Yucca Mountain was supposed to be. Yucca Mountain is right in Nevada, right by the test site. It's already contaminated. And why can't they put it out there? It's because it's too hot to put under the ground. They can't do that for at least 150 years, even if that was a good idea. We need to let it sit and cool for 150 years, past our lifetimes. We have several more generations to go before we can make that move. Susan.
So with all these dangers, and Japan is the perfect example, so is anyone trying to build more of these plants?
Are they trying to build more nuclear plants? Unfortunately, yes. This industry is pushed and coddled by the government. They want it to go, and there's a certain train of thought. People say, well, we need to be competitive in the nuclear arms industry. We need to be at the head of the pack. Have you ever heard that said? Recently, I think Trump was saying it. So there is a great push from that angle to make sure that we have our skin in the game, make sure that we know that we have people that are knowledgeable about nuclear technology so we can make a better bomb. And so therefore, let's fund these plants even though we know they're not economical, so we have people going into that field and getting to know about it so that we can have our, make that better bomb. Very, very sad. So there's that angle. The other one is now the older plants that are now on their way out. The communities in Ohio and other places are going and saying, well, we're going to lose all these good jobs. And they are high-paying jobs. And I'll say this, I have to give some credit to the nuclear, even though I think it's one of the biggest human blunders of all time. At least a place like France is not as deadly polluted as it used to be. If you look at the old buildings, they used to be just covered with soot from the coal. And they cleaned that all off because their air is pretty clean there. Why? Because they have these nuclear plants. Bad side, we have a bunch of waste. So we've taken all of the pollution from the air, concentrated into really toxic material that then we have to store for a very long time. Was it a good trade-off? Maybe, but not anymore. Because now we have solar technology, which wasn't being developed at that time, even though I guess it could have been. But we didn't have the ability to get to the solar where it is today, so that it's, and here's the other reason solar will always win. It is compatible with the free market optimization, free market economy. Because you're making small things, lots of them, that can be competed with many companies, and they make them quickly. So they can compete and the price drops. If you make a nuclear plant, it's there for 60 years. There's no competition. It just never happens. It's incompatible. So you never get free market optimization out of nuclear plants. Or these other things. No, oil and gas, those are all subject to free market optimization, and they've done well with that. But solar panels, they're continuing to drop in price, and that's assuming they only last 25 years. These big utility scale plants, and I see many more of them. If you go on Google satellite view, and you look out on the freeways going towards Phoenix, you'll see this little patch in the ground, and you get up close and you realize it looks like little solar panels, each one of them, but when you look closer, it's a whole bunch of rows of 1,000 solar panels in each one of those squares. Okay, yes, next question.
What is the waste factor of solar energy? You know, when you compare nuclear with waste, because I still hear a lot.
Not even close. I mean, you can.
Yeah,
you
but
can.
I mean, what is it? Because I believe it's going to be because I've heard it as a talking point against
Complete BS. Complete
right,
BS.
no, I mean, this is what I hear, but how can I go against it? I don't know what to say.
Well, it's something that we can maybe substantiate more. But you can take a solar panel and you can put it in your house. I mean, what happens if it fails? It just falls to the ground. I mean, nothing happens to it.
Yeah, but I mean, what is it? What is used in making the product that if it should crack or fall into the earth or something? Is there anything in there? And it's like computers. Everybody says computers.
Yeah, I mean, maybe there is probably some toxics that are a concern in the battery technology, especially that's coupled with that. And maybe there's some other areas, but none of it is radioactive. So it's a totally different thing. You might have a little bit of toxics here that you have to be concerned about, but it isn't going to, you stand next to it for 3 minutes and you get a fatal dose. It's completely different scale.
Yeah. Well, I didn't understand.
No, there's everything that you do.
This is something I'm
Yeah.
hearing because they want to stay with nuclear.
Right, they're going to have a thing that, everything has some drawback. And I'm sure there's some drawback. I know the wind turbines sometimes catch on fire. They can fall over. They can maybe kill people when they fall. They're pretty big. There's some danger there. But it's like a completely different scale. Mo.
How radioactive are those canisters next to the ocean?
Yeah, they're very radioactive. Now, some comparison has been given that the amount of some of the substances is the same as what was emitted at Chernobyl inside the can, one of the cans. Inside the can. But it's not being dispersed like it was at Chernobyl, which was a huge explosion. So even though it might be the same in one can, the likelihood of it having a meltdown and exploding, I'm not saying it's totally impossible. I'm sure something could happen and force that to happen, but generally it doesn't look like it would happen like in an operating plant. Any operating plant is so much more dangerous than just spent fuel that's sitting there.
Is there a radioactive map that shows some levels of radioactivity in the area? Or?
Well, if you put it in the SVC with those shields, it really is not radioactive. You know, there isn't anything more. Doesn't really emit outside. In fact, they claim that you can stand right over it, and actually the amount of radiation from the sun is greater than what you get from the facility if everything goes well.
Well, what if it really melts down?
If you have a problem with it, like they just about dropped one of them into the hole, 18 feet, they say it wouldn't have been breached, but that's their point of view. It could have fallen down and breached, come apart, and you would have had maybe a mini meltdown. We don't really know. And it may have been very bad there. And so Tom is an expert. What do you have to say?
NRC in 2007 did an examination of dropping one of these things and seeing what would happen. They concluded there was I think the number was a 27% chance of the thing breaching. Now that's a very serious amount of breaching. Okay? And that was with a cylinder that had no gouges in it, like these do. So they have been very reluctant to ever re-examine for this current situation.
In the new one, they say we've re-examined it, and now there's zero risk. Zero.
Yeah,
It went from 28% risk of breaching down to zero risk, none. Like, that's, okay, well, what kind of engineer are you? There's always some risk.
Well, they should meet there then.
You can't get it out of them.
Ray, the point is that we could find no basis for that conclusion. The report that supposedly has that is what do they call it, a proprietary report. And so there's nothing that's available to look at to see the conclusion. Our conclusion is that, the thing will pop up and it pops up and you'll ruin the cooling system because it's like several sticks of dynamite going off whenever that makes the bottom there. And that will surely destroy the cooling system. There is an argument that once you destroy one of those and you have all that energy radiating out, then you'll run the cooling system nearby cylinders. And hence you get a domino effect. So I would say, Ray, that it's a little optimistic to say there is no risk at all. I think this is very serious risk.
Well, if they drop it,
let me just finish.
but if it's just sitting there compared to the plant, the difference is
No,
astronomical.
if it's just sitting there, you have to look at what was the issue in Fukushima. I hate to be stealing nobody with that, but basically, this is a good question. Fukushima, we had 3 meltdowns there, and they were very concerned with the spent fuel pool essentially melted down. They almost evacuated Tokyo because of that. So it's a real kind of question. And so one of the questions I think is a good one to ask, let me just stand up so you can see me, is how good is what's the difference between the Fukushima system, okay, and the Onofre system? The basic idea is that the Fukushima thing was in the water wasn't enough to take the heat out, but the water's enough to allow the reaction between the zircaloy and the oxygen in the water, giving you hydrogen gas. So therefore, it's a good idea to get the stuff out of the spent fuel pool into dry storage. That's the argument. So you say, well, how dry is this stuff? You say, look, Ray has just shown you real clearly that right now, the 18 inches below the bottom of the canister is where the mean high tide is, okay? That's mean. That means that half of the time it's higher than that. So if you look at the details, what you find out is that the current situation has these canisters that are wet, okay, already at the bottom. Now, if you do any kind of sea level rise, it makes it even wetter. Jim Hanson's numbers show that these canisters should be 25% underwater by 50 years from now. So we basically have taken this thing from a reactor spent fuel pole, stuck it into so-called dry storage. The dry storage is currently at least damp storage, okay, and will soon be wet storage. So basically, there is no substantive difference between leaving the stuff in the spent fuel pole and moving it into, quote, dry storage. So that's a little bit of a different spin.
Yeah, it is. We kind of argued to leave it, in fact, right away, because I was, when we were working on the lawsuit, we said, don't move it at all until you decide where you're going to put it, because we don't think this is a good place. In fact, don't even build it. Unfortunately, they started building it before we could stop them with a $200 million bond. So we couldn't get them to stop, and they just kept going, railroading and toward this destination, and now they're still going to probably put it all into this isphacy, and we still got this problem of it's too close to the water and so forth, and what their alternatives are is too far away and so forth, and that's why we're going for, we think, this inside Pendleton. So question over there.
Yes, sorry, I may have missed it, but are they burying them all now, all of these cylinders, one a week or something?
They are partway through moving I think they've done 29 out of the 75 in that one area that they have to put in that area. So they restarted on June 3rd. I'm not sure how many they've done so far. It takes them a couple of days to move all of the assemblies into the canister, seal it up, move it out there. I'm not sure how many days it takes, but it isn't once a day or anything
So
like
they're not
that.
going to stop, they're just going to keep going?
They're not going to stop. There's no way that we can stop them. And so they are going to fill up that facility right by the coast because there was no way to stop it. Even though we tried our best, I couldn't get it to stop. Okay, yes, gentlemen here.
Yeah, there's a couple things. One is talk about the Marine Corps not being excited about having it there because they're a training post. The guys there now probably were around 83 when the barracks got blown up in Beirut. If you want to train people, train to watch for infiltrators and all that.
Yeah, that's what we thought that would be a pretty good training opportunity to watch this nuclear fuel. That's a real thing, and it's just like most security jobs, it's boring as hell. But you're actually doing something that's worthwhile, and people would get a good feeling that they're doing something.
You have senior NCOs who've been in combat and witness attacks on their posts who would be the trainers, and that's their job.
Yeah. So I go along with that. That's a good argument to make with them to say, you think this is just a training site. Hey, we've got a good thing for you to train on here. Yes, next thing. You have another one?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned that 5/8.5 inches was one of the programs. It was an interview, I think, a hearing, and say over online because it was good. And at one point, for some reason, I think it was an hour and 28 minutes, one of the engineers was talking about how thick the walls of that was and went down to 1/2 inch at certain points. So that's a failure thickness as far as I'm concerned.
It's only 5/8. Well, it's 5/8 here because it's so close to the coast, and but it's still they had to admit that the stress corrosion cracking was something they didn't understand, and that will impact these. In fact, they did notice that in the Yucca Mountain plan. They also were aware of stress corrosion cracking, and to them it was basically instantaneous at a certain point. They couldn't predict when it was going to be, but at a certain point it goes all the way through because the crack develops from geologic time just about instantly, and then you've got a leak in it. Then what happens? Well, there's debate. Does anything really happen if the air seeps in and the helium seeps out? it may be worse than they think. So it may turn out to be a much worse problem than they're saying, even though right now they say, gee, nothing really happens.
It seems they're arguing a best case scenario. You want 40 years, we'll give you 40 years. Now, you want indefinite, well, okay, now it's indefinite.
That's what they did in Yucca Mountain too. They said, 100,000 years isn't enough. We want you to scale it up to 1 million. And so they said, okay, we'll just do a global replace, change 100,000 to 1 million throughout the report. How can you predict 1 million? Okay, we've got a hand waving over here.
My friends were up there recently and they said there didn't seem to be any security at all. They had security there, and they went on right on the beach and no one seemed to be there.
Yeah, well, trust me, there's very high security, and I see it every time I go there. You don't necessarily see them,
Okay.
but they are there, and they track everything I do. By the way, who is the worker for Southern California Edison in here? Does somebody want to stand up and admit it? No, maybe nobody. They usually come to all of my thing, at least they will review it, and then recently I had an 84-page dossier from their attorneys saying that I had said a bunch of wrong stuff and that they were taking me to court for misstating things. And I said, no, sorry. They wanted me to say this is a good place for them to put it. I said, no, I'm never saying that, so forget it. And
I'll face you, one screw up with this
I know.
deal, and what's the land around here? You have your homes, your investments, all this other stuff. You got this movement goes, we don't know how far, how
Yeah.
big it would be, how far it would go.
Yeah, and if you, again, you got to watch Chernobyl because that really makes it sink in about how dangerous this stuff is. It is really, really dangerous. It's super toxic. It's like nothing else in the world. And as they explained in there, it's like bullets flying out, little tiny bullets through your system, and they take everything apart. They take your DNA apart internally. And so you get sick. You get like a sunburn through and through, all the way through your body. And so it is, if a disaster does happen, we have that radioactive plume, and they say, well, nothing happens, nobody got cancer right away, everything is fine. It's not until later that you get the cancer. Or maybe other things, cancer is not necessarily the only thing that is a bad thing in our life, but it is something that is pretty bad, and so they look at that, and it's something this stuff really does cause. Okay, another question, yes?
Do you suggest that people keep iodine in their medicine cabinet for their children so that they don't get thyroid cancer?
I don't keep iodine. I don't go near the plant. I don't even want to take tours of the plant.
It's a disaster,
But the good thing is, again, the plant is shut down. That took us from about a bazillion %, risk down to only 1 million. So we're still dangerous, but the difference is, and most of the activist organizations like Friends of the Earth and so forth, they figure everything is fine now here. They're not going to argue over the spent fuel because their main agenda is to shut down the other plants, and they're working so hard on that. The good news is, as I said, that chart showing PV solar going down is killing all the plants. They can't exist anymore against this super cheap solar that's just going through the floor. They built in California in 2016, they had already built at that time 16 gigawatts worth of PV solar, utility scale, not rooftops, just the stuff that's big utility scale PV solar plants. 16 gigawatts is like the same as 16 nuclear plants, 16 nuclear units that they built within just a few years. Why should we struggle over a 20-year development for another nuclear plant when we can build them easily? We can get that much power easily from PV solar, so much different. And as I say, the question, how risky is PV solar? Well, the panel could fall over, hit you, could kill someone because it fell on them. But even if something bad happens and leaches into the ground, it doesn't take 250,000 years before it's safe to go there. It's just not even the same. But there is still issues, I know. The PV solar sometimes has in the past taken a lot of energy to create the silicon that they use for it, but they've gone past that now. They don't use the same technology to make those cells because of the competition that I described. You have different
maybe 100,000 different people making these that are all competing, going different directions. And it's way different than just a few companies almost going out of business building a nuclear plant with not very many ideas.
Thank you. Because I'm just trying to gather some information to help me speak a little better now. Here's another question too, kind of. Does that, drop, or I mean, the cost of solar drop? How does that impact the automobiles and eliminate the gas?
Well, one thing that they're doing now, and I saw a really encouraging plant where they take the solar energy and they use that and they recapture carbon from the air. They take carbon dioxide out of the air. They take the energy required to do that. And they take the hydrogen out of water and they combine that, and now they have hydrocarbons. They can build fuel that's just as good as any gasoline that way. And it's built by, instead of taking the fossil fuel out of the ground, they're taking the CO2 out of the air and splitting water and taking the hydrogen out of the water, making gasoline effectively, and from the sun.
Are they doing that now?
They have a plant that's a demonstration plant, and they want to scale it up. I tell you what, go to the Facebook page, and I'll make sure that I mention it again.
That's really...
It is a really encouraging thing, because that means that we have another option for what we do with our cars. Maybe electric is not where it's going. Maybe we can use gasoline still, but the gasoline has to be a renewable source. It has to be from, and basically if it's not fossil fuel, it's not releasing any new carbon dioxide. They take the carbon dioxide out and it puts it back in. You didn't get anywhere when you did that, but at least you can run those same cars and make sure you're using fuel that is not adding more.
Right here, you think if there was a big oil find in the world, bigger than Saudi Arabia in 1964, be all over the news and we all know about it, wouldn't we?
A big oil what?
Big oil find, big oil discovery.
Yeah. Well, maybe, but they kept finding more. I was looking into this question about how much is there and are we running out? And at a certain point, they just said, hey, we have a lot more. It went up all of a sudden to they had more.
I have a video, and it showed it, and I have a friend that's building a house over there right now, and they're going to be oil refinery here in Guyana, where the Jim Jones thing was years ago. They found billions of barrels of oil in the ocean there, a couple hundred feet down, and more than Saudi Arabia in '64.
Well, there is the argument that maybe methane, which is natural gas, is something that is renewable somehow, and that it somehow gets generated in the rocks. I haven't seen a real serious explanation for that, but there's some of that floating around. Okay, so I guess I've gone
one point was that
far enough.
It's going to be so plentiful that it's going to be competing with solar and everything else. Maybe it's not a clean source of energy, but it might be a cheap source of energy in the future, and that would be sad.
I think there is, my view is, if you have oil or gas or whatever available, somebody's going to buy it and use it and burn it. You can't legislate them not to do it, and it's going to happen. The good news is, as I said, that PV solar is becoming so cheap, they're running out of the other stuff. It's becoming more expensive. And so this is going to be really, really important for us to get by that. So they're not going to buy that and burn it. If it costs more, then they can just buy the electricity from the solar panels. It's not going to happen. Last question.
So I have one. Is there any way they could use this nuclear waste for anything else? Has anybody discovered somewhere in the world that we can add something to it and neutralize
It might happen that the nuclear waste can be used for, curing all disease. I don't know. It's possible, but
other countries, what are they?
sometimes there's an argument said that this is really valuable stuff. We should really preserve it. There is, in, where is it, North Carolina, there's this massive buildup of cylinders of depleted uranium. Depleted uranium is the stuff that is basically not the uranium-235 that they can use for fission. It's the regular uranium that's the pure stuff. And so they've got a bunch of that there. And so Bill Gates had a big project to see if they could burn the depleted uranium because it's just sitting there. And so there's some initiatives like that. There's also this so-called small modular reactor push to try to get the reactors smaller so they're more compatible with the free market optimization I mentioned. I don't think that's going to be successful either, even though they're still going to do it. And these new plants that they're proposing, they have new ones all the time that come out. I see, oh, we've just gone through the preliminary approval of this new plant. I just don't think that they're actually going to do it, because no one, unless somebody in the government does this sometimes, they say, we really want this plant to happen for that reason. It keeps skin in the game. We can have better nuclear bombs. And that's a very sad thing, because the nuclear bombs that we did hit in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they never should have been dropped. I mean, these were civilian areas, and they could have just had a demonstration that said, we will do this unless you back out of it. They never did that. They just went ahead and dropped them. And actually, I've heard, according to Oliver Stone, at least in his history, that they had already given up. They didn't need to drop the bombs anyway. So there's a dispute about that. I know some people say, no, that saved millions of lives. Maybe it did, but I still don't think it was a good idea. And now they had to go, after they dropped that bomb, they had to say, atoms for peace, what we did was a good thing. We developed a new source of energy. Isn't this nice? And we saved millions of lives because we dropped those bombs on the civilian area. We were not terrorists. And so we've had this problem of cognitive dissonance around us being a good country and dropping bombs on civilian populations and killing hundreds of thousands of people in a blink of an eye. And now we realize nuclear energy, not a good idea. We're sitting here with waste that we don't know what to deal with and can't even handle, and can't even move it to 1,500 feet from the fuel pool to the ISFC that's right there without having an accident, with people that were not trained or were new, not enough supervision. All these things were wrong with that whole scene. We have to continue, though, like it or not, to really keep an eye on these people that are handling this waste. We have to make sure the public is watching. And that's why the very last slide here that I had, I'll go back to it, because one of the most coercive, or I should say, the images of the eyes looking at you. Okay, isn't that kind of creepy right there? Guess what? This image is really, really significant to humans. You can take a picture of eyes, put it on your copy machine, and they tried this. They had the honor system coffee nook right at work. Donate for your coffee. They put the eyes on the wall. Donations went up 4 times. Someone is watching you. Are you donating? They put the eyes on a little sign. Don't steal bicycles. Bicycles thefts dropped significantly. Just the eyes. So we need to keep our eyes on the people doing this at all times. We need to watch them and make sure we know what they're doing. If we're, it could have been way different here at San Onofre. We have a very good collective group of activists that are working on this. And you may say, Guy, you're not all working together, you're in different groups and so forth, but that's a good thing. And I learned this at Occupy. It's called diversity of tactics. Some people will come in and say, oh, we want to get all together and have the same uniform message that we're all saying together. And that's powerful. Oh, but maybe more powerful is having messages come in from every different direction, coming at a different thing, and it drives them nuts. They can't infiltrate your group as well. They can't guard against whatever you're saying because they don't know what it's going to be. So if you're going up against these corporations, diversity of tactics is really important. So having the various groups that are a little bit variant, really powerful. You had another question?
Just why I thought of it. I'll talk to the fire while, but with this deal, it's like that's what they're doing with us. There's so many issues that are out there. They're doing so many things that are detrimental to the environment, tax structure, pick one. That doesn't do to us, and we can't focus well. So anybody who has an idea, they have something they want to fight for, start.
Well, that's why one of the reasons we wanted to have these regular meetings where we look at different issues because there's so many important issues that are out there. I mean, we don't want to just focus on one thing and say that's the most important issue that there is on the planet. Now, San Onofre is a very important issue, but it's actually pretty far from this area. You know, I live actually out near El Cajon, actually past El Cajon. And they said when I filed my NRC filing that I'm not close enough. I'm not within 50 miles. And indeed, I'm not within 50 statute miles, but I'm within 50 nautical miles. And I said, you know what? You're talking about wind and climate and weather. They always use nautical miles in the weather, so they had to throw out that objection to my filing. So I'm within 50 nautical miles of San Onofre, so I qualify. So I luckily got that one, so I could defend myself. But no, I'm very far from San Onofre, but I think it's such a critical issue, and since I have a bent for it, I've been working on it for a long time and was able to get through all these mediations and everything. Actually, like when 3 Mile Island accident happened, I seriously reviewed that whole thing. I was still just right out of college. And I looked at some of the valves that failed. Just the valve was so complex, I couldn't even understand how it was supposed to work. It was not just a simple valve. It was activated by pressure through several different things and springs and all this stuff in there. I said, this is so complex, just one valve. How do we expect the whole plant to work properly? And I said, forget it. These are so complex. You look at the complexity of these plants, there's no way they can be safe. And indeed, a lot of the plant designs that they have, about 28 of these Mark I containments that everybody knows are just a pile of crap. They're never going to work. They know that they're dangerous as hell, but they're still installed, and they say, we're just going to leave them there. Shh, be quiet. All built on lies. Any last? So, yes.
Well, I just had to comment because you said the 50-mile radius, but actually in Chernobyl they had more cancer deaths from farther away in different places because of the wind and the rain. And so it's a weather pattern too.
So it's really an artificial constraint. We argued that too. That really there's no like boundary at 50 miles where the radiation stays in and everything. Same thing that they did with we fought the Sunrise Power Link was another project that we did, and we realized it wasn't for the solar power coming in to San Diego. It was to take this fairly dirty natural gas power south of the border and ship it up to LA. That was the real reason for the Sunrise Power Link, and but they can burn this fairly dirty burning natural gas south of the border, and it doesn't cross that border either, does it? So that's another one of those weird things that they have. Okay, so I think we've had enough. What I would suggest is that we carry on. There's more snacks in the back. I thank everybody for coming. This is our big kickoff, so I want everybody to come back each time we have one of these. Find out what is involved in these other ones. Again, we're going to be talking about the Tijuana River pollution problem next time, and then the 5G radiation problem of that we're installing these new 5G radiators all over, and that's going to be impacting our health as well. Thank you.